keep winning, winning. I'ma keep winning, winning. Ooh. I'ma keep winning, winning. You can try to save yourself, but you only go.
What's going on, guys? Jake Ham back with another video, and today I'm going to be giving you my biggest winners from days 1 and 2 of the combine. So we just wrapped up day number 2, and the DBs and tight ends just went. So I'm going to give you my 5 biggest winners that did the best at the combine. But before we get into it, please make sure to like the video, comment down below anything you agree or disagree with in this video, and make sure to subscribe to my channel for future NFL content that I'm going to be putting out with the combine the rest of this week, free agency, and with the NFL draft coming up. So please make sure to subscribe to keep up with all that. So we just wrapped up day 2, and a lot of these guys were able to come out and perform. Some guys didn't perform, and that even kind of hurt their stock. But in this video, we're going to focus on the biggest winners that went out and performed and kind of raised their stock the most throughout the first 2 days of the combine. So jumping into it. Number 1, we have starting off with day 1 winners, and Shamar Stewart continues to raise his stock. He did the same thing at the Senior Bowl a month ago. In the early part of February, he went out and dominated, and he showed his athletic ability and how much of an athletic freak he was. And he pretty much just did the same thing today or yesterday at day 1 of the NFL Combine, and he went out and he pretty much lit up the NFL Combine. He was rated the number 3 edge player in Combine history with his athletic performance. He was kind of that late mid first round, kind of in the late teens, early 20s kind of areas where he was being mocked. Now he's I think he's going to be a solid middle of the first round pick. He could go somebody like the Cowboys at 12. He could go I think the farthest he falls is to the Bengals. He could go to the Falcons or the Cardinals, somebody in the mid first round. And I think the ceiling they could possibly go is top 10. I think he could eventually go all the way up to number 8 to the Carolina Panthers, somebody like that. Somebody in this draft is definitely going to fall in love with his athletic ability. It's pretty much going to be the same way that Trayvon Walker was in his draft. He just pretty much came out and lit up the combine, and his athletic skills and his athletic scores, everybody's going to fall in love with. He may not have been the most productive in college, but they're going to see that upside that he potentially has on the football field and pretty much go based on that, even though he only had 5 sacks. With him being able to go in and successfully complete a lot of the meetings that with a lot of the sources and the way he was able to go out and light it up athletically, you can see his scores there. Vertical, he jumped a 40-inch vertical. He ran a 4.59 40-yard dash, and his broad jump was 10.11, which is absolutely off the charts and crazy for an edge performance, as we'll see with a couple other guys in this. But he definitely raised his stock, and I could see a team falling in love with him and taking him just based off athletic ability and potential, and taking him at the top 10 with somebody like a Panthers that just are gonna need to get defensive talent for him. So I could easily see him jumping into the top 10 now. Number 2 guy from day 1, I'm gonna have James Pierce. James Pierce was an interesting one because there's been a lot of rumors of him having character issues, and a lot of them kind of have had him fall into the late first round. And a lot of people have seen his production throughout the last couple of years in the SEC with him being a dominant edge rusher in that conference. And he's kind of been falling down a lot of people's boards, and people really haven't really wondered why. You've seen with Daniel Jeremiah had him going last pick in the first round, Mel Kiper going on in the late first. So going into the day, he was in that late first category, and he went out there and he balled at the combine. His 40-yard dash was the fastest among the edges, and he was talked about by a lot with his athletic ability. Now he still does kind of struggle with bend, and at the edge position, you definitely want a guy that's really bendy and able to pretty much go all the way around and have that bend when they're trying to beat the tackle on the edge to pretty much get to the quarterback. But I think he's kind of in that Shamar Stewart range again now. I think he's now getting talked about in that area again since his combine performance. I think he's going to be in the middle of the first round. Kind of the same way could go to a team like the Bengals, Cardinals, maybe even the Colts may bite on an edge rusher if they end up liking one. And I think he's in that same spot as Shamar Stewart again. I think he could go into the top 10 if a team falls in love with him, with his abilities. A team like the 49ers could end up taking him if they need a pass rusher. They just brought in Robert Saleh, so he is all about defensive line. So they definitely need to buff up their trenches. With his testing out, his vertical was a 31, so it wasn't as good as Shamar Stewart's, but his 40-yard dash was a lot better. He's a little bit more skinnier, but he's a lot more speedier. He ran that 4.47, which was crazy and the fastest among all the defensive linemen, and his broad jump was a 10.3. So his explosiveness isn't as much, but he's definitely more of that quicker, speedier edge rusher type guy, but he doesn't have that crazy explosiveness that Shamar Stewart might have. And I think like a team like the Panthers could end up falling in love with his athletic ability, same way that Shamar Stewart is. And he could go number 8, could go into the top 10, sneak in maybe to a Bears or somebody like that. And it's just an edge rusher that kind of fell down boards a little bit because of prospect fatigue. He was seen as the number 1 overall guy a year ago, so a lot of people were kind of having him fall down a lot of boards into that late first round pick, and he kind of rose his stock back up to where it was originally into that middle of the first round, and then into that top 10 argument and area that a lot of teams are going to be debating on over the next couple months until the draft. So he kind of just brought it back to where it was before the season was, and he was able to show off his athletic ability and show that he could be a dominant edge rusher in this league with the potential and the production that he's had in the SEC the last couple of years. With the next guy, we're moving on to kind of a middle round type guy was Ty Robinson out in Nebraska. He went out and he had a pretty good performance at the combine. He was definitely one of the better mid round prospects that was out there. He was kind of projected in the third round, and now I feel like he's kind of risen his stock up to that second round, and his ceiling is more that mid second round area. I think that's the highest that he's going to go. His vertical is a 33 and a half. He ran a 4.83 40, which is very good for an interior defensive lineman. And his broad jump was a 9.11, so you know his explosiveness wasn't as there, but he showed his speed. And a guy that he kind of reminds me of was Braden Frisk from last year that the Rams got in the second round and came out and dominated. He kind of reminds me of that type of build and that type of performance because Braden Frisk last year, a lot of guys knew who he was. You know, this guy could be dominant. He could have the ability to be able to make it in this league, but he had a lot of question marks. And Ty Robinson kind of reminds me of that because Braden Frisk last year ended up coming out and he had a dominant combine performance. And Ty Robinson does the same thing. He has a great combine performance, comes out, kind of gets his name more known to the more casual viewer that may have been watching it and kind of seen. And with that 40-yard dash with a 4.83 with the for an interior defensive lineman reminds me a lot of Braden Fisk and what he's able to do for the Rams today. So I think that's kind of more of his player comp for Ty Robinson. And I think some teams are going to see that and see the similarities in him. And he's going to rise up some boards into that second round area. I don't think he's going to go early in the second round. I still think he's going to be more that mid second to late second round. Maybe even fall a little bit into the third still. But I do think he's risen up some boards on the team just based off his athletic ability and his speed and showing that he could use his speed to be able to be a game wrecker on that inside, along with his height and weight and his measurables being able to measure out based on the prospect that he is and that he's going to be able to be a dominant force for the interior defense line for whatever team ends up taking him. Moving on to the next guy, we're moving on to the day 2 guys that just wrapped up the cornerbacks. I think the number 1 riser from day 2 was Maxwell Hairston. This was a guy that was being mentioned. Mel Kiper had him in at the late first round area. A lot of people had him in that second round, day 2 type area. But Maxwell Hairston, he had a dominant performance. Like most of these guys, he came out and he ran the fastest 40 out of all the secondary guys. He was kind of seen as a second round type area because you know there's a lot of question marks around him and his physical ability. His tackling's not necessarily the best. That's one of the question marks too with him. But now I think he's going to go more in that late first round area, and I think his ceiling, the highest they could possibly go, is the early 20s, maybe to like a Packers or maybe even a Steelers could take a shot on a secondary piece instead of a receiver. His vertical was a 39 and a half. His 40 was blazing fast. He ran a 4.28. That's the fastest this year so far out of all the 40s. His broad jump was a 10.9, and he was able to go out and show his athletic abilities and put it to his tape. A lot of the questions, was is he going to be able to keep up? His athletic abilities are able to show on his tape because he has great tracking ability. He has great able to kind of make up speed against guys if he's able to get burnt. As we've seen in a clip from Isaiah Bond against Texas, he's able to pretty much catch up to those guys and get his hands in and around the ball in those areas. And he's one of these guys that I think he could be the third corner taken off the board. I think it's going to be Will Johnson, Travis Hunter. depending on how you see Travis Hunter. And then I think the third corner in this draft that's going to be taken is a Maxwell Hairston, and a team's going to definitely take him in that late part of the first round. I think he could still fall into the second, but I think he's definitely risen up with that 4.28 40 and his athletic traits that he was able to show at the combine. Moving on, to the next guy, Nick Emmanwori from South Carolina. He was another guy that was pretty much an athletic freak that pretty much showed out kind of like a Shamir Stewart. He was seen as the number one safety in athletic ability and athletic score in the combine and combine history. He was kind of seen in that second round area. I do think a team now is going to take him in the late first. I think that he could be the first safety off the board, which a lot of people have Malachi Starks. I do think he's going to be the first safety taken in the draft, in my opinion. Now, I do think a team could take him in that early 20s area. He had a 43-inch vertical, which is crazy. He ran a 4.38, and his broad jump was 11.6. Now, those are crazy stats in and of themselves, but whenever you put in his size that he is, he's 6'3", 250, and or yeah, about 240, 6'3", 240-ish, and in that area and his build, he's pretty much a crazy build. And combining that with his athletic ability on the field and with his tape at South Carolina, teams are going to be able to fall in love with his athletic ability along with his size that he was able to measure out to. He had some crazy measurements where they were able to measure him, and he rose up some boards throughout this process in the combine. And a lot of teams kind of had questionable questions on him. He was kind of seeing that middle of the second round guy. Now, with all this put together, he's able to kind of climb up and potentially go into that late first round area. Moving on to the tight ends, this is the last part of day two that they were able to fall into, and the number one tight end I think ended up winning was Mason Taylor. Now, I will say a lot of the tight ends did not work out. The top three tight ends, in my opinion, didn't work out. Tyler Warren sat out, and then Colson Loveland and Elijah Aurora from Miami. Both those guys sat out with injury, so kind of the top three tight ends on the most prospects list sat out. But Mason Taylor jumped in there. He didn't run the 40, didn't do any of the physicals like the vertical and the broad jump. But whenever he came out and he did the blocking sled and he came out and he did the route running and he was crazy on those, he was seen as a early third round type guy. And now I do think he's going to sneak into that second round area. I think he's going to be more of a late second round, a mid second round. But he was able to show out his athletic ability. He had some crazy stats at LSU. He received for over 1,000 yards. I think he had about 15 touchdowns on the season from Garrett Nussmeier. So he was a really big receiving threat in college that not a lot of people know about. And Mel Kiper had him ranked as the number three tight end on his board. And me, myself, and some other people didn't necessarily agree with that. I liked Aurora and thought Aurora was the number three. Some people have Harold Fannin as the number three, who also had an amazing day, but we kind of knew what he was going to do. But Mason Taylor's go out and show his athletic and receiving ability, and his route running was very crisp, along with his blocking technique on the sled. Did a very good job. He was able to keep his hands, deliver a great punch, and had that flat back that you want in the guy, and was able to drive his feet and drive him straight out the ball. So he was able to show off not only his receiving, and in that gauntlet drill, he ran one of the best gauntlet drills that I've ever seen with the receiving. He stayed on a straight line, almost a perfect straight line down the line, and received every single ball perfectly into his hands. So he was able to go out and show both his blocking and his receiving to pretty much race his stock into the second round. And then the second tight end, I think definitely rose his stock a lot, was Terrence Ferguson. This is another guy at Oregon that had a lot of crazy stats that's not really talked about. He doesn't really have a lot of the physical traits. He's not really a huge target, but he was kind of a fourth round guy. I do think that he could sneak into day two in that late third round area. I think that he could sneak into that area. He came out and he had an amazing day. He may have even had, you could argue that he had the best tight end day at the combine. He had a 39-inch vertical. He had a 4.63 40 that was the highest and quickest 40 out of any of the tight ends. And his broad jump was a 10.2. And what was so impressive about him, he was able to come out and run the fastest 40. So I didn't really think that he was going to be as good on the blocking sled, but he did just as good as Mason Taylor in the blocking sled as any of them. And then in the route running drills, he was able to go out and run as Chris routes. And I didn't really know much about Terrence Ferguson, to be honest with you. And then you've seen his stats, and he had some of the best stats out of any of the tight ends in this class last year with his receiving yards and touchdowns. And it made sense with how powerful Oregon's offense was. So it kind of made sense and kind of clicked together. But he was able to show it off on this national level at the combine for all 32 of these teams with his 40 and his route running and his blocking. So I definitely think he rose into the day two area from about the fourth round projection that he was at. And then lastly, the last guy I want to talk about, this is my own really kind of preference that I've seen there. This is the guy that I was really watching throughout this and really liked what he was doing on every single drill was Gavin Bartholomew. And he's from Pittsburgh, and I'd never heard of him before this combine. A lot of these guys, they get invited to the combine. A lot of them are undrafted free agents, and that was his projection right now, was an undrafted free agent. In my opinion, if I was an NFL team, I'm at least taking a flyer on this guy in the seventh round, and I would even think about it in the fifth or sixth. What really caught my eye with him, it wasn't necessarily his 40. He ran a 4.7 40, but then he didn't test out with his vertical or broad jump. But what really stood out to me was his blocking. Out of all the tight ends in at the combine with the blocking sled, he was the most powerful and technician whenever it came to blocking on the sled. As soon as he went, he was the very first guy that did the blocking sled in the drill because of his last name, Bartholomew. Obviously, it's in alphabetical order. But as soon as he went, I said, "Oh my God, that was a really good rep there." He was able to get his hips under it, drive it off the ball, and just moved it with ease. And I was like, I wonder if all these Titans are going to be like that. And the next guy was kind of stalemated by the sled and didn't really move it as much. And as you went on, you were still looking for that guy to do just as good as Bartholomew on it. And Gavin Bartholomew was the number one guy. I didn't see another guy that blocked the sled as good as he did. And then I was like, okay, well, I didn't really know much about him because he was an undrafted free agent. I assumed he was probably just a blocking tight end that only really blocked and didn't really receive much. But then you looked at his stats, he had almost 800 yards receiving for Pitt. And then you seen him run his routes, and he was running some crisp routes and was catching every single ball. Same thing with the gauntlet drill. He was able to catch every single one. He stayed in a mostly straight line, and he was that great. He reminds me a lot of a great George Kittle type build where he's able to go out and block and he's able to go out and receive. And I think if you're looking for a late round tight end and a stacked tight end class, this is one of the best tight end classes I've seen, in my opinion. I would definitely take a flyer on this guy in the sixth round and the seventh round, take a shot at him. Kind of like a Zach Kuntz from a couple of years ago that went undrafted and he plays for the Jets. That was like 6'6" and a crazy height. Gavin Bartholomew reminds me of kind of that. If he's in that seventh round area, from what he was able to do at the combine and show off with his blocking ability, and then being able to go out and run those routes as crisp as he did, and be able to receive the ball with how dominant his run blocking technique was, I would take him in that seventh round. I would take him in the sixth round, and I would even consider it in the fifth round if he was still there on that board. Now, I don't know if a lot of teams are going to fall in love with him as I did throughout this combine and watching him in every single drill. Obviously, I'm not an NFL scout for a reason, so he could still go undrafted to a lot of teams. But if I'm a team, I'm definitely drafting him with my seventh round pick at least. So these are a lot of the main guys I thought were the biggest winners of days 1 and 2 in the combine. So please make sure to like the video, comment down below anything you agreed or disagree with. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up with future NFL content that I'm going to be putting out. And thanks for watching.
Yeah, feel like John Moran. Need a triple double. Told him check the stats. Yeah, I got a couple. I don't drop the ball. Now I never fumble. I'm the MVP. Now I feel like Russell. Feel like John Moran. Need a triple